It's the pits to carry out a plan that you don't think has a chance to be successful. Okay. So have a goal, have a realistic plan, be flexible. Remember that the goal is the goal. The plan is not the goal. The plan is just how you get there. So if an unexpected door opens for you that brings you towards that goal, then you need to walk through that door, even though it wasn't part of your original plan.
Welcome to the New World Normal podcast. I'm Debbie Harrell, your host, and twice a month I'm speaking with some amazing humans who are disrupting norms and working to create a more inclusive and holistic society. These people are using their sphere of influence, no matter how large or small, to positively impact the world around them. They'll be sharing their expertise as well as sharing stories of resiliency and hope. We'll be talking about the issues that are affecting us all, from the environment, human rights, social issues, criminal justice, and education. We'll talk about our healthcare systems, wellness, and food, from how it's cultivated and distributed to how it's prepared and consumed. Basically, we're going to talk about all the systems in our society that aren't necessarily working for the benefit of the many. We'll strategize and collaborate on how we as a collective can intentionally make better choices every day that will lead to a positive change in the world around us. Because in the end, it's up to us to solve these problems. There is no magic potion or magic wand. It is us and our daily choices and how we spend our time and how we invest our resources. Intrigued? Stick around and have a listen, and by all means, click like or subscribe on your favorite podcast source. Hello, and welcome back to the New World Normal podcast. Today we have a special episode. It's a little longer than our normal episode, but I think you will agree that it deserved the extra time, the extra attention. I hope you're able to stick through for the entire interview. Today we are talking to Jeffrey Deskovic, who is an attorney, and he was actually wrongfully incarcerated at the age of 17 for a rape and murder that he did not commit, and ended up spending 16 years in prison before he was exonerated. The story is how he found his purpose in this most horrible experience. It's truly a story of resilience and finding hope in the darkest of times, and I hope that it has as a profound impact on you as it did on me. And here it is. Thank you so much for taking some time to talk with us today. I have to admit that when I first started the idea for this, that this is the type of stories that I wanted to tell. So the fact that I'm getting to do it so early on in the process has me, number one, a little emotional, because these types of stories are emotional at heart. And then also very nervous that because I really want to do your story justice and be able to be a part of bringing it to more ears and bringing awareness of what you're trying to do, because I think it's huge. So if you just want to start telling a little bit about your story and how you got to where you are today.
As you mentioned, my name's Jeffrey Deskovic, and I'm the founder of the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice, which has as its mission freeing people who are wrongfully imprisoned, as well as pursuing policy changes aimed at preventing that in the first place. We've been able to get 11 people home that were wrongfully imprisoned. We've been able to help pass 3 laws aimed at preventing wrongful conviction. I'm an advisory board member for a national coalition group called It Could Happen to You, which the foundation is part of, and we were able to pass an additional 5 laws that way. I sit on the Global Advisory Council for Restorative Justice International. I'm an attorney. I have a master's degree in criminal justice. My thesis is written on wrongful conviction causes and reform. I would say I'm kind of a quasi-public figure, and my advocacy takes on the form of doing media, meeting with elected officials, writing media and new media interviews, as well as proving cases and, working on them. And I come to all of this work as a first-person advocate, meaning that I personally was impacted. So I served 16 years in prison from age 17 to 32 for a murder and rape that I did not commit. The wrongful conviction, which happened despite a pretrial negative DNA test result, was caused by a coerced false confession, prosecutorial misconduct, fraud by the medical examiner, terrible public defender. I lost 7 appeals. I got turned down for parole. Ultimately, I was exonerated through further DNA testing through the DNA data bank, which not only affirmed the earlier negative result, but also identified the actual perpetrator whose DNA was in the data bank, because left free while I was doing time for his crime. He killed a second victim 3.5 years later, who was a school teacher and had 2 children.
Just horrific injustice after injustice for you and so many other people. And the fact that you had to endure what you did, but then in the end, you turned it around to help other people really speaks to your character. And the fact that two things that I was just blown away with by the fact that the DNA never matched you. And the reason that the police were first interested in you is because you were emotional at your classmates' funerals. And to think that, well, isn't that how people are supposed to be? Like, you just had a traumatic event. One of your peers was raped and murdered. Like, that is traumatic. And anybody would experience have an emotional reaction. And so the fact that the police were looking at you because of something, again, that speaks to your character, you were a caring individual for your classmate that experienced this horrific thing. And then to me, that makes me, what type of a student were you? Were you the ne'er-do-well kid, or were you the kid that was at school because he wanted to be there and enjoyed being around your peers? Or
yeah, so just thinking how I can give a nice bow tie type answer. Well, let me just say this, right? So I didn't think of it this way back then, because I was 16 when I was arrested, and as I mentioned, I was ultimately 17 by the time the trial started, which I lost. But so back then, I kind of lived a double life. So there was my life after school. That was in the apartment complex that I lived in, and there were a lot of kids that lived there and in the surrounding areas. There were a lot of us, and kind of whatever I suggested would usually be what we would do. If we're going to ride bikes, play Monopoly, going to play basketball, we're going to movies, we're going to go do video games, we're going to play all kind of games that we even created. I was kind of like one of the main kids there. But that was after school. I mean, in school, that was a different set of kids. And, I had actually skipped first grade. So really throughout from grades 2 through 8 and through high school, my peers there, not only were they not the same kids that I was familiar with me that I was playing with after school, but they were all a little bit older than me. And that became more pronounced in high school. So I was quiet and to myself. I mean, I suppose I was thought of somewhat as a nerd, except that I wasn't getting good grades. I was actually in high school, because the gulf between me and people in that grade was greater. So, I was kind of picked on and kind of on the outskirts of the society. And that really impacted my grades to the point that at the end of my freshman year, I mean, I had to go to summer school, but I knew if I did that, then I would be with those same set of kids again. So I opted not to go to summer school so that I would get left back, so that I would be in with a different set of kids.
That was kind of a fresh start. That's probably not a bad idea.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking of. Right. And it did help somewhat. But again, even though they weren't older than me, but it still was a different set of kids than what I was used to. So it helped, but only somewhat. I was still kind of like the quiet, tight, withdrawn kid. And actually that ties into another reason why I was on the police radar. So the police interviewed a lot of students from the high school, and some of them suggested to the police that they might want to talk to me because, again, I didn't fit in. I guess the underlying thinking is that people that are to themselves or that are loners commit heinous crimes. I guess that's the theory. And then you combine that with, the emotional aspect, which you already went over, which I have to say also a different way that doesn't make sense is that there really had been very few murders in Peekskill overall. And this murder really shook the whole small city, approximately 25,000 people. It shook this whole city up to the point that free mental health counseling was offered for anybody who wanted it.
Oh, wow.
So those two factors. And in that aspect of it, again, yeah, I was emotional. I was a sensitive teenager. But then again, I wasn't all that different in being affected emotionally than even adults.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the other thing I'll mention is that the Peekskill police got a psychological profile from the NYPD, which purported to have the psychological characteristics of the actual perpetrator. And I had the misfortune of matching that profile. So that was a type of reinforcing factor.
And then you see these stories, I've watched documentaries on the wrongfully. And the part that always bothers me is these police officers, when they get the idea, and then instead of, like, they have a hypothesis and they just want to prove that, and they just ignore things that might be counter to that, like the fact that the DNA present wasn't yours, and they still were insistent on pushing you to make a confession that wasn't true, instead of putting that much energy into finding who actually did it. And that seems to be a system problem, because that seems to happen over and over again in lots of cases. And do you see any way to, it's like a win at all cost. I feel like it's just indicative of our highly competitive society. Like, it's always, there's got to be a winner and a loser, instead of just working for the common good, or the finding the root of the problem rather than the symptoms of the problem. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. So first of all, that what you're referring to is, in the field, is called tunnel vision, which is when you form a conclusion and then you only try to confirm that conclusion, only pay attention to evidence that supports that, ignore other evidence, or come up with obscure explanations that almost defy common sense. So there is that aspect to it that's recognized. So, and then there's also, later on in the process, the prosecutor is supposed to be what's referred to as a minister of justice, meaning that they prosecute the guilty and dismiss cases against innocent people, and they're supposed to be there to find the truth, not simply trying to win.
Right.
But too often, that's what it becomes. So rounding my picture out a little bit from this point, I came from a single-parent household. My father was never involved in my life in any aspect, and that's going to intersect with the story. So in that, for about 6 weeks, the police played this cat and mouse game with me, in which half the time they would speak to me as if I was a suspect, and the other half the time they would pretend like they needed my help to solve the crime. They would say things like, well, the kids won't talk freely around us, but they will around you. Let us know if you hear anything. Stop in from time to time. Prior to being a teenager, I wanted to be a cop when I grew up. So that, along with my age, 16, was how they were able to pull the wool over my eyes as to the absurdity that a 16-year-old would be able to help in an active homicide investigation. They also employ the good cop, bad cop technique, sometimes referred to as Mutt and Jeff, in which one officer takes on a more aggressive role, whereas their partner pretends to be a friend who's opposed to what's going on, but somehow not able to intervene. And I began to look up to that officer who was pretending to be my friend as a father figure. So eventually they got me to agree to take a polygraph test, otherwise referred to as a lie detector test, by saying, we have some new information in the police file and we want to share that with you, and that will allow you to be more helpful to us, but you have to take and pass this polygraph first. So the next day, rather than report to the high school, I went to the police station for the polygraph. Because it was a school day, my mother and grandmother thought I was in school, so they didn't call around looking for me. They drove me from the city of Peekskill, which is in Westchester County. They drove me to the town of Brewster in Putnam County, 40 minutes away by car, which meant that I was no longer able to leave on my own. I was instead totally dependent upon the police.
And that, as a minor, that was okay? They could just take you without talking to your parents?
Yes. If you're 16 years old, then you are able to speak to the police, decide to speak to the police and waive your rights without having a parent present. Yes. So they put me in the car by myself with the officer pretending to be my friend. Right? Let's keep the rapport going. And the other two officers are following in a different vehicle. So they drove me 40 minutes away out of county, which means I can't leave on my own. I'm totally dependent on the police. I don't know where I am. I have no independent way of escape. The polygraphist himself, Daniel Stevens, he's a Putnam County Sheriff's investigator, but he's dressed like a civilian. He never identified himself as law enforcement. Never read me my rights. I had no idea he was law enforcement. He gave me a 4-page brochure which explained how the polygraph worked, but it had a lot of big words in it that I didn't understand. But then I thought, well, I'm there to help the police, so what does it matter? Let's just get on with it.
Uh-huh. Right. You want to be helpful.
Now, there's no attorney present. They don't give me anything to eat the entire time I'm there. So from the brochure, they put me in a small room, and he gave me countless cups of coffee, which seems fairly clear. The purpose of that was to wire me up, get me nervous.
That does seem like a conscious choice on their part and just despicable. The mom in me is like cringing on every level. I mean, you were a child, and
I really was, yeah. And from there, he literally wired me up to the polygraph machine. And then he launched into his third-degree tactics. So he invaded my personal space. He raised his voice at me. He kept asking me the same questions over and over again. And each hour that passes by, my fear increases in proportion to the time. And he kept that up for 6.5 to 7 hours. Towards the end, he said, "What do you mean you didn't do it? You just told me through the test result that you did. We just want you to verbally confirm it." So when he said that to me, that really shot my fear to the roof. And at that point, the officer who had been pretending to be my friend, he came in the room and told me that the other officers were going to harm me, but that he had been holding them off, but he couldn't do so any longer. "You have to help yourself here. Look, just tell them what they want to hear. You can go home afterwards. You're not going to be arrested." So being young, naive, frightened, 16 years old, not thinking about the long term, just being concerned with my safety in the moment, I was in fear of my life. The fact that I didn't know where I was and that nobody else knew where I was either loomed very large in my mind. I was overwhelmed emotionally and psychologically. There's this possibility of harm that he's thrown in the air. He's thrown me this life preserver. I'm really not used to talking to adult males anyway, much less somebody carrying on like he is. And so I took the out which he offered, and I made up a story based on the information which he had given me in the course of the interrogation. By the time it was all said and done, I had collapsed on the floor into a fetal position, crying uncontrollably. Obviously, I was arrested. I was charged with a murder and rape.
Did they arrest you right then and that day, or?
They did, but I didn't realize I was arrested. So I didn't actually realize that I had been. So they put me in handcuffs to bring me back to the police station, and I asked, "Well, what are you putting me in handcuffs for? You just told me that I wasn't going to be arrested." And the answer I got was safety. They just said safety. Then they brought me back to the police station, and they ordered a pizza, and I was eating pizza at the police station. I still don't realize I've been arrested. And periodically, I'm interrupted by a uniformed police officer that's carrying out various facets of processing. So eventually, they put the ink on my fingers to get the fingerprints. And I remember that really got me angry because I'm there eating pizza. So I look around. There's only one officer that I recognize. This was the bad cop, but he was familiar with me. And I said, what is he doing? I'm over here eating. I got ink all over my fingers. I'm trying to eat pizza here. And he said, "Oh, he has a right to do that." And I said, "What do you mean he has a right to do that?" I was told I wasn't being arrested. And that's when he said, no, you are being charged with the crime. And that's when I realized that I had been arrested.
I feel like and we know so much more about those types of interrogations and tactics and how they do just coerce someone to say something but I think under the circumstances, anybody, if you're being told you're going to go home, just tell them what they want to hear, especially a 6-year-old, like, sure, they're going to tell them what they want to hear so they can get home to their family and be done with this.
That definitely is a commonality in many of the false confession cases. Continuing on the story, before the trial started, the DNA test results came in from the FBI lab, and it showed that the semen found in the victim didn't match me. But instead of acknowledging they made a mistake, they continued to prosecute full speed ahead. So the prosecutor got the medical examiner to commit fraud. After the DNA didn't match me, he suddenly claimed, try to follow the wording of this now, don't get lost. This is going to sound crazy because the whole thing was crazy.
It's already crazy.
Yes, it is, right. So the medical examiner says that he remembered that he forgot to document medical evidence that he claimed showed that the victim had been sexually active, which is what opened the door for the prosecutor to argue that she was sleeping around and that was how the DNA didn't match me, and yet I was still guilty. Taking it a step further, he also names another youth by name that he claimed had slept with the victim, but he never tries to set the proper evidentiary foundation for that. He never got a DNA sample from this other youth. He never called him as a witness. He just made the unsupported argument to the jury. He got away with that because the victim's family was not coming to court, so they had no idea that her reputation was being trashed in order to wrongfully convict me. That was one aspect of it. And another aspect of it is my defense attorney let him get away with that. My lawyer should have never represented me because of conflict of interest. This other youth that the prosecutor was falsely saying had slept with the victim was represented by another member of that same public defender office, and specifically by the lawyer who was supposed to be supervising him on my case. And so that conflict prevented the defense from asking him for a sample. It prevented the defense from calling him as a witness.
Oh, that's crazy.
Continuing on, the police went back out in the field and interviewed 17 witnesses who knew the victim in one capacity or another. All of them told the police that she did not have a boyfriend, there was no consensual sex, but the police did not document any of those witness interviews, and so therefore that was never turned over to my attorney. We never knew about that.
It's just despicable. That's the word that keeps popping in my head. Is like, how can people do this with somebody else's life?
Right. And, and continuing on, the interrogation was not videotaped. It was not audio taped. There was no signed confession. It was just the officer's word for it. And so when they came to court, they left the threat and false promise, which were illegal for them to do. They left that out of their story. I wanted to testify as to those facts, but my lawyer would not allow me to. But here's the other ways that this attorney didn't defend me. He never called my alibi as a witness. I was actually playing wiffle ball when the crime happened. He rarely met with me. When he did meet with me and I tried to explain to him that I was innocent and what happened in the interrogation room, he was always shutting me up. One time he told me he didn't care if I was guilty or innocent. He never explained to the jury the significance of the DNA not matching me. He never used the DNA to challenge the confession. Sometimes he argued to the jury that the confession never happened. Other times he argued that it did happen, but it was coerced. At still other times he was saying that he was arguing that it happened, but it was false. So that type of scattershot approach had to have left him standing there with no credibility at all, as someone just willing to say anything.
Did you at the time, as a 16, 17-year-old boy, recognize how poorly he was doing? I'm sure now in hindsight.
No. Well, in hindsight, I'd recognize, but then no. No, because I had never been arrested before, never was on the legal system before. He had a reputation of being their best trial attorney, and then he kind of found a way to use my age against me. The fact that, the confidentiality between an attorney and a client, I wanted to involve my mother or other adults, some of my uncles, in some of the discussions that we had, things like, whether to testify or not, whether to have a jury trial or go with a bench trial, which is decided by a judge. But he refused to allow anybody to be involved in those conversations. He said, no, they're not the client, you are the confidential, so he kind of found a way to use that rule against me. So that was another aspect of how I was kind of in over my head. Maybe the last thing I'll say on that point, and when I move to a different point about the trial, which is that, my mother didn't know that I was meeting with the police. She knew about the first time. And then after that, she told me she didn't want me to speak with them anymore. But that didn't really make sense to me because I knew I didn't do anything. I knew I didn't know anything. They're telling me that they need my help. I was 16 years old. That's really the age where, the kids, we think we know everything. We're pushing back against our parents, and their parents are all dumb, or we're smart.
Right.
So, and really she knew what she was talking about, and I didn't. But the lawyer used that. He said, look, just, I'm the lawyer, you're the client, right? You already thought you knew better than adults once. Okay, so just sit back and don't make that mistake again. Just sit back and let me do my job. So that's what I did, and I only understood what was going on in the court to a limited extent. But if all of that wasn't enough, there were a few other crazy things about the trial. So, firstly, a polygraph result, the polygraph not being scientific, the results are not accurate, and so therefore the results are not admissible in court unless both sides agree. But the judge came up with this ruling where he said that, well, because the confession happened while you were being polygraphed, he used that to allow this polygraphist to repeatedly tell the jury that I failed the polygraph.
Oh, geez.
So he came up with that prejudicial backdoor rule. So that was one aspect. Another thing was that the victim's clothes, including her bra, was put into evidence. And the jury asked to see the bra. And that was important because one of the statements that they coerced out of me, I said that I ripped her bra off. But there are certain bras that the way that they're made, you can't rip them off. You cannot rip them off. So when the jury asked to see that, we thought that was like a bright spot for the defense. Maybe they'd look at it, see you can't rip that off, conclude this confession's false, and that means a not guilty verdict. But it was at that moment that's when the court told everybody that the victim's clothes, including the bra, had been left in the courtroom over the weekend, and that the janitors apparently thought it was garbage, and so it was thrown out.
Oh, my goodness. That is insane.
And the third thing was that the jury sent a note out asking if they were not able to come up with a verdict, would they be kept sequestered, like in a hotel, cut off from, newspapers, television, family, friends? Would they be sequestered over the Christmas holiday? And the judge said yes. So I've learned since I've been exonerated that at that point, it was 11-1 for a guilty verdict. There was one holdout juror that thought that I was innocent, but he said that they were all pressuring him, and that once the judge said they'd be sequestered over the Christmas holiday, that ratcheted the pressure up, and none of them wanted to be there over the Christmas holiday, including him. And that was why he switched his vote. And so the end result of all of that was that I was found guilty of a murder and rape, which I did not commit. On the day of the sentencing, I begged the judge to overturn the verdict because I was innocent, and I referenced the DNA to support my contention. And he actually told me on the record, maybe you are innocent. But you would think that would lead him to exercised his discretion by overturning the conviction. I mean, obviously he had a doubt. I mean, who wouldn't have had a doubt in light of the DNA not matching me? And there's no evidence other than this, confession that's obtained under very, very questionable circumstances. But instead of overturning the conviction, he instead sentenced me to 15 to life sentence. So I'd been charged as an adult, tried as an adult, sentenced as an adult, and I was therefore sent to a men's maximum security prison with that sentence.
I want to get to that next, but I do have a question for you about that judge, especially now that you are an attorney. What do you feel motivates a judge who, I mean, maybe I'm naive in that I kind of hold judges in esteem, like they are supposed to be fair and impartial, and what motivates someone to ignore something so blatant and continue forward with a sentence and a ruling that it just isn't right?
I mean, there's a number of factors that could apply in any given situation. So there is a disproportionate number of judges that were prosecutors before. So sometimes that's a factor. In fact, there's even a sarcastic saying within the legal profession that, the judge is the second prosecutor in the room.
Okay.
So a reference to the bias. So there's that aspect to it. Another aspect is that judges really don't like to be reversed. And so a lot of them are hesitant to make a ruling that they think will be reversed at a higher court. Certainly overturning a conviction is something that, in general, that might be a 50-50 as to whether it gets, reversed or not. But that's just generically. That turns on the facts of each case. I don't think there's any way in hell that if he would overturn my conviction, that would have been reversed. There was plenty of support for that, but that's just a generic thing. And then I think that there's a hesitation as well. We're going to, just the time and resources that went into a trial in the first place, and then we're going to throw all that out and start all over again. And, that kind of gets into a similar problem in terms of on the appeal level. That the average length of wrongful imprisonment is 14 years. By the time most people are exonerated, their appeals typically have been exhausted. And, that's because, the judges are hesitant at overturning convictions. When you look at these case summaries, whether on the Innocence Project's website or on the website of the National Registry of Exoneration, when you read the case summaries, there were plenty of red flags along the way, plenty of opportunities for courts to correct the conviction during the appeal process, and yet it never happened. So there's like two tensions in the justice system, so one of them I would summarize by saying finality of conviction versus accuracy. The competing ideas that on one hand, we can't keep doing this forever. At some point, you had your day in court, you lost, that's that. And in a way, there's some legitimacy to that. But what good is a final conclusion if that final conclusion is not accurate? So I think that whenever there's an objective reason to review something, that's when the court should review it. But too many times, that's not what happens. It's just that finality of conviction instinct to just rubber stamp deny appeals. And I think that's really just an example of that on the part of my trial judge. But the other competing concept is what I'll refer to as proceduralism versus substantive justice. So, and again, I don't want to get too far ahead, but one of my appeals was lost because the court received my paperwork 4 days too late. So I lost based on that. Whereas in reality, I wouldn't care if I'm 10,000 days late. What of it?
Right. The substance should matter more than the procedure.
Exactly. Give me a ruling on the merits. Let's get this thing right. If someone violated a deadline, you take that up with that lawyer. I don't have any control, or no defendant has control over that. We might or might not be aware of the deadline. We don't have a legal education. We certainly have no control over the lawyer. So, that's just brutal. That's not justice. So those concepts come to mind when you ask me what would motivate a judge, to do that.
If you're enjoying this conversation, you'll love the discussions happening in the New World Normal community, where we meet regularly to discuss personal growth and social issues, because we know when we do our work, we're better able to navigate this ever-changing world. Be sure to follow the link in the show notes for more information. It's just one thing after another. And let's go back to, you said you went straight into a maximum security men's prison at 17.
Right.
And
yes,
just the thought of that, from my limited knowledge of what those facilities are like, how, as a young man, child, you already proved yourself to be compassionate and sensitive to some level, going into an environment like that, how do you stay true to yourself and protect yourself?
Sure. So, one thing is that you have to learn the prison mores and survival tactics and observe those while simultaneously never internalizing those values. So that's a big part. There's always older prisoners that, give you tips here and there, but it's up to you if you want to listen and learn and wisen up. Or many people don't make it because they don't realize the environment that they're in, or they know better than everybody. So, that's a big part of it. But the prison was very dangerous. There were, there's 3 or 4 stabbings or cuttings every day. There's other violence that doesn't involve weapons. There's gang activity. So cumulatively, there's a general environment of violence and adrenaline that permeate the air. I'm 17 years old. What am I going to do in a fight against a 25 or 30-year-old? I have built-in handicap. I'm convicted of a sex offense. If I'd have just been there for murder, that would have been fine, right? But because it was the rape with that murder, there's a vigilante mentality towards people who are convicted of sex offenses. So I always had that concern in the back of my head that people would discover what I was incarcerated for, and that could motivate them to assault me. There were different times in the course of my incarceration where I was assaulted. One time I nearly lost my life because the prisoners thought I was, they thought I was a sex offender. The idea that I could be innocent was the furthest thing from their mind.
That's what I was going to ask. Were there other people that you encountered that said, that they were innocent? Do you feel they were, or?
Yeah. So there were 19 people that I did time with so far that have been exonerated either before me or after me. That's in 16 years. Having said that, I was only aware of the innocence of 3 of them while I was there. So for the most part, innocence is not really spoken of in prison. So it's kind of like a couple of ships passing in the night. I was only really aware of one other person that was, that just by way of him telling me. It was 3 people. So yeah, one person's, I read their paperwork and stuff like that. Another person managed to get some publicity for their case. So I learned about it that way. But one of those people, Frank Sterling, was one of the factors that I always cite when people ask me, how did you survive, or how did you make it through? So once every 6 weeks, Frank and I, for 13 and a half years, we would get together once every 6 weeks, and we would have a conversation, and half the conversation would be keeping each other going morale-wise, and the other half the time would just be a brainstorm session over what's the next tactic to try. And Frank was exonerated through DNA testing a couple of years after me, so it wasn't just that I was naively believing in his innocence, thinking, well, because I'm innocent, he must be too. No, he actually was innocent. I was right about that. But speaking of that question, in terms of how I survived, how did I make it through? Belief in God was something, and another thing was that I used to go to the law library and learn the law, and that gave a sense of comfort and empowerment. I would collect articles about other people who were exonerated, and that gave me motivation to keep going. I broke things into manageable chunks. So in my mind, I wasn't doing a 15 to life sentence. I thought I was just doing a year or 2 to the next appeal, which I was certain that I was going to win because I was innocent and I believed in the system still. Another thing was that I read, I would from 1998 to 2006, I read 3 or 4 nonfiction books a week. So I kept myself busy in myself. I wasn't doing legal work or writing letters looking for help. I was, reading nonfiction books. I engaged in this elaborate delusion when I would play basketball, chess, or ping pong. I would pretend like I was a professional player, and so were the other people. But it wasn't really like kids fooling around on a playground. This is more that I needed to get out of the prison for a couple of hours mentally, and so that delusion, allowed me to do that. I would collect pictures of nature scenes. I would cut them out and hang them. There was a certain part of the wall, the cell, that you were allowed to put pictures on. And so I would hang those pictures up and kind of travel there mentally.
I feel like so many of the tactics are things that people know to help with just everyday overwhelming experiences. So to hear that you were able to use those in such an intense situation and find comfort and purpose and empowerment, I think you used the word empowerment, is encouraging for all of us, I think. And then the fact that resilience you've shown, and to then come out after you're exonerated, I guess you should maybe tell a little bit of how that happened.
Yes. So I went to the appellate division, the first court that you go to, and, my issues were my innocence based on the DNA, and that this losing the evidence, the polygraph is with the results, the confession being admitted in violation of my constitutional rights. 10 issues of law were raised. And the court, first of all, ruled that I was free to come and go as I wanted. So therefore, they determined that the statements were not involuntary. They wrote that there was overwhelming evidence of guilt, which doesn't make any sense as the DNA didn't match me. They got rid of all the rest of my issues in one sentence, writing that they had looked at the rest of my issues and found them to either be without merit or else not preserved for review. They ruled against me 5-0. It was all downhill from there. The re-argument motion was denied in one word, denied. The New York Court of Appeals, it's a 2-step process. You have to get permission from the court first to appeal. And if they give you permission, then they give you a ruling on the issues that you raise. So the Court of Appeals declined to give me permission to appeal to them. So I lost that way. And that's 3 appeals so far. I lost in federal court because the court clerk gave my lawyer the wrong information pertaining to the filing procedure, which resulted in my petition arriving 4 days too late, which the district attorney then jumped on and urged the court to simply rule that I was late, which the court did. So I lost that way. I challenged that ruling at the Federal Court of Appeals, and they upheld that ruling. My lawyer moved to re-argue the case in front of them, but that was denied in one word, denied. And then the U.S. Supreme Court declined to give me permission to appeal to them. So altogether, that's 7 appeals, 11 years in prison now at this point. Once your appeals are over, they don't give you an attorney anymore. So the only way back into court is if you can find some previously unknown evidence of innocence. So I began this letter writing campaign over 4 years, because trying to find an attorney or an investigator to take my case for free because I didn't have any money to hire one. So I wrote those letters, rarely getting responses other than the occasional no. Then I went to the parole board where, because I maintained my innocence rather than expressing remorse and taking responsibility, I was turned down for parole. And I thought that at that point, I thought I was going to die in prison, for a crime I didn't commit. So one of the letters that I wrote in care of to a book author, in care of the publishing company, one of the letters was instead forwarded to an investigator. And when I sent her the paperwork showing that the DNA didn't match me, right away she was convinced of my innocence. And so she ultimately connected me with the Innocence Project. She suggested I write them. She lobbied them. She got other organizations to lobby them also. And then I got lucky that one of the intake workers there was, when the lawyers didn't want to take my case because the DNA had already excluded me before, she presented the case to them 2 additional times, getting them to agree to take the case on the 3rd try. So that was how I got their representation. That was the first key.
And what year was that?
Yeah, that was in 2006. Second key was the district attorney, who had blocked me from getting further DNA testing several times and had fought all of my appeals successfully, left office. So her successor was willing to allow me to get the further testing. So that was the second key. And the third key was that took the crime scene DNA evidence and put it into the data bank. It matched the actual perpetrator. And so on September 22nd, 2006, the conviction was overturned and I was released. I went back to court on November 2nd, 2006, at which point all the charges against me were dismissed on actual innocence grounds. And at that point, I was free to try to rebuild my life at that point.
And that just had to be an overwhelming experience because then where do you go from there? But you actually did something amazing and took your story and decided to give it some purpose.
Absolutely. So the first 5 years were a very difficult 5 years. So I was released with nothing. New York State does allow people who've been exonerated to seek financial compensation. But, that's a legal process to that. It took me 5 years before I got anything. So it was very difficult 5 years of existence. I was always passed over for gainful employment. It seemed like employers, they wanted somebody with a track record. They didn't seem to have any patience for any on-the-job training. There was the psychological after effects of my experience. There was stigma. Yeah, I was in prison wrongfully for 16 years, but I was in prison for 16 years. So how much of that rubbed off on me? Is it safe to be alone someplace with me? The technology, the world was different. Technology was different. So cell phones, GPS, internet hadn't been created. Culture was different. Neighborhoods didn't look the same. And different people lived there. But it was enough of a similarity that it felt like cumulatively all those factors felt like I was in a parallel universe, an alternative.
I was just going to say, it must have felt like you were in a sci-fi movie or something. Like, what has happened?
Yes, right. No, it really did. It was awkward whenever I would meet up with my extended family, who would either never come to see me or very rarely come. So I knew who they were intellectually, but I was a different person, so were they. So it was awkward, and it was really hard for me to communicate with them. And really, it was very lonely as well, because one of the psychological, not only had I lost track of friends and when I got arrested, but and had minimal family contact, but also, I was released when I was 32. I really felt like I was 17. That was the age that I was when I was last free. So I felt 17. So yeah, I still want to throw a ball around. Let's go on the bumper cars and do other energy-based things, but that's not what people my age, are gonna do. So it was kind of a lonely thing. So it was a difficult 5 years. I did lack stability of housing. At one point, I was a couple of weeks away from a homeless shelter. But simultaneous to that, at that press conference when I was released, I spoke off the cuff for 2.5 hours, and everything I'd ever wanted to say but could never get anyone to hear all kind of came out. So I realized at that moment, I could be an advocate without necessarily being a lawyer. So parallel to all those difficulties, I did start doing advocacy work. I was speaking across the country. And that was one of the few ways I was able to earn money. And I caught on as a weekly columnist for a weekly newspaper. And they paid well, but the problem was that they only wanted one article a week. That I was regularly meeting with elected officials, and I was also trading privacy for awareness of issues. So I was doing regular print, radio, and television interviews. I got a scholarship from Mercy College to finish the bachelor's degree. So while in prison, I had gotten the GED and associates in a year towards the bachelor's. At the time, funding was cut. But one of the articles referenced as a human interest item in one of the articles about me was that I was 30 credits short of a bachelor's degree. So the dean of Mercy College lined up a scholarship for me with them to finish the bachelor's degree. And when I lost the temporary housing that I had, Mercy College allowed me to live on campus, and they gave me the meal plan. So that was how I avoided the homeless shelter. And really, it was kind of an intervention in my life in a way, because rather foolishly, I was thinking, that I was too old to go to college, that was something I wanted before, but that ship passed by. But I didn't have anything else I was doing, so I kind of did it just to do it. But again, I kind of turned the light bulb on, and I was able to springboard from there. I mean, I did want to go to law school from there, but I didn't do well on the LSAT. There's a standardized test, and I didn't get into law school. So I decided to get a master's degree in criminal justice from the John Jay College of Criminal Justice. And then that was part of my plan as well, because in the last school that turned me down, I had applied to 10 law schools, and I knew my score wasn't good enough, but at the same time, I was trying to get them to look at me holistically, look at my background, look at what I've already done, look at what I want to do with the degree. And, and not for nothing, but over 30 credits that I took while free. I mean, I had a 3.93 GPA. But I remember in that interview for that one school, I mean, the dean threw that back at me and said, yeah, you're right. That's an incredible accomplishment, but let's keep it in perspective. Okay, it's from Mercy College. It's not from a top 10 school. So my answer to that was, thinking, well, let me go and get a grad school degree from a top 10 school. John Jay is a top 10 school in criminal justice. And the next go around, when I try this again, I'll have that to answer, right? And we'll see who says what about that. I'll have that part of it solved. So that was kind of what my strategy was in that. And so after 5 years, I was compensated, and I wanted to take the advocacy work to the next level. And I wanted to be involved in freeing people. I mean, up to that point, I kind of nibbled on the edges. I mean, so meaning that I wrote about some cases while the injustices were still afoot, and I attend sometimes the defense lawyers or friends and family of the people claiming innocence wanted me to physically show up in court during their hearings for the visual effect, because some of the judges recognized me, and the hope was that if they saw me in the courtroom supporting somebody, that they would pay a little bit more attention to that rather than this knee-jerk rubber stamp deny.
Rather than paying attention to the substance.
Right. Rather than that old okie doke, maybe the judge would think, well, Deskovic's here. Let me pay attention to this one.
Right.
That was the philosophy. I mean, that worked a little bit in a couple of cases, not all the time. But I did that, and then a few times when there was public relation work happening on behalf of somebody. I mean, a lot of times, sometimes what goes on outside the courtroom sets the stage for what goes on in the courtroom. And so in seeking to exonerate people, lawyers and other advocates would try to get some media coverage to pair that with the hearings. Again, the public's watching this one, so, let me, I can't just be so blatant, So I allowed my name to be used in the media advisory and press release to get more attention from the media than what would otherwise be present. So all those were ways I was kind of nibbling on the edges of it. But I wanted to be more directly involved. And so I did use some of the money. I used $1.5 million from what I got to start the nonprofit, the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice. And as I mentioned at the outset, we have been able to get 11 people home, and we did continue to do the policy work that I was doing as an individual, just from an organizational point of view. And I think that added credibility to everything. But at some point, I became not satisfied with sitting in the front row of the courtroom. I wanted to be able to sit at the defense table. I wanted to be able to represent some of the clients and make some of the arguments. Hence, taking another stab at getting into law school. So I did the test again. I actually scored 1 point less than what I did last time.
Oh, no.
Yeah, right. But I'm thinking, well, before I go through all this difficulty of, prepping for this terrible test a third time, I'm at least going to apply everywhere and try it again.
Uh-huh.
So I did try it again, and again, I have the master's degree, and I think that the law schools kind of had a somewhat of an evolution of thought. They were looking more holistically at candidates, and that was generally, and so I knew that going in. And I think another factor was schools were really hurting for students also. So knowing all of those things, I applied again anyway. And it's a funny story, which I'll take half a second to tell you about.
Yes, please do.
Sure. So I applied to a bunch of schools again. And, PACE was that I got into. They had turned me down before, but this time, one of my supporters from last time, who I had maintained relationship with, Professor Gershman, he was now on the admissions committee.
Oh, that's a friendly turn of event for a change.
Yes, absolutely. And it reached a point where he said to me, "Look, Jeff, I've exhausted my resources here. Okay, I can't get you in. I've used everything I have at this school as a founding member just to get you an interview. You have to come here and knock it out of the park. Otherwise, you're not getting in, no matter what I do." So a couple of days before I go to the admissions committee, and by the way, I'm helping when I apply to 10 schools. Like, I'm trying to help my candidacy, 6 degrees of separation. So I was contacting everybody I knew and finding out who did they know and who did they know, whatever edge I could get to throw some attention to my application to try to get them to look at this thing a little bit broader. And so one of those efforts worked. And so 2 faculty members from a different law school, one of whom I knew, and then she connected me with another person who then reviewed me as a candidate and decided to recommend me. So I got into a different law school a couple of days prior to getting into PACE.
Oh, wow.
And so when I'm in the interview there, I am hitting the thing out of the park, and they're asking me all types of hard questions, and I'm answering everything. And towards the end, I kind of turned things around on them. I said, well, look, I have a few questions for all of you. All right. This isn't just if you want me. This is also if I want you. This is kind of a two-way street here, and I have to tell you that as of a couple of days ago, I've been admitted to another school. So I have to let them know, am I coming or not? So I'm not going to tell them no and then wait for your decision. And then you wind up telling me no, and I just don't have a seat anywhere. So that was what my ally piped up and said, well, I'm not surprised that you've been admitted someplace. And then a different person on the admissions committee says, when do you have to let them know by? And I said 2 days. 2 days from now. So they didn't have very much time to decide. But that was really a very fortunate turn of events, because I really wanted to go to Pace Law School, because while I would have gone to the other school, that was 4 hours away and in a different state. I would have had to leave my house behind, my life behind, my advocacy work behind, in order to do that. Whereas, Pace was 45 minutes from my house. It was in Westchester County, where everything went wrong for me at. So it had a special, and where I grew up at as well. So I really wanted to go to school there. And that was how I wound up getting into law school.
Well, I can imagine how lucky they were to have you, because what a unique perspective you brought to their school and their curriculum. Because, your story in itself is pretty amazing. And the advocacy work that you were doing, even without your degree, like how many other students were busy working in the field
Right.
for the greater good, not just like, I want to be an attorney because attorneys make a lot of money and they have a lot of power, like, I think it's important for them to start looking at the students more holistically. Like you say, like, what is the motivation? Your motivation was undeniable. And as an attorney, like I see that you say you were fighting for policy changes.
Yes.
And as an attorney, that probably helps greatly, right?
Yes. Yes. Being an attorney certainly helps me in fighting for policy changes. It's an additional level of credibility that it engenders for sure. And, it has gotten me more ears, more people listen to some of the, the things that I say when I advocate for policy changes. So certainly it's helped quite a bit externally, and I feel empowered. And, I have entered 3 cases so the foundation has 10 active cases we're working on now that's separate from the 11 people we got home. And, I have entered 3 of those cases as co-counsel and, in pursuit of the dream of exonerating others as an attorney. The degree helps that way. But maybe another aspect of it is I do feel it is an additional confidence factor. It really has shaped and changed even how I perceive even myself to some extent.
Oh, I could believe that for sure. That is an empowering thing. And you should be proud of the work that you've done and the person you have become, or probably always were, despite this horrific experience. So you have your foundation that is working to get people exonerated. And I'm sure that you accept donations.
We do.
So I want to get that word out for sure. And then are there other ways that people can help? Do you look for volunteers? Like I imagine just intake of cases or reading that sort of, there's got to be a lot of stuff. Are you ever looking for volunteers?
Yeah, we do look for volunteers, but really people that have some background or training in the legal field. The biggest area that we need help on is definitely the intake. They have to have a legal background for that, not necessarily be a lawyer, but have some legal orientation on that. But in terms of fundraising, we do have a page on the Patreon website, which is for people who are willing to be recurring monthly donors.
Oh, set up a monthly.
Sure. So imagine if 25,000 people were willing to donate $3 or $5. I mean, you look at political candidates of either party raising double-digit, triple-digit millions of dollars, largely on what they're referred to as small dollar donations. I mean, why not for a cause?
Right.
I mean, we certainly have the track record. I do work 50 or 60 hours a week pro bono. The compensation that I have, it pays a certain amount of dividends and interest monthly that I live off of. And so I'm able to just spend my time doing what I'd like to do, which is this kind of work. So this is a pro bono effort on my end. So just speaking to whether or not the charity is authentic or not, I mean, nothing that was ever contributed would make its way into my pocket under any theory.
There's the disclaimers and the transparency. I appreciate you saying that. And I was going to ask the Patreon subscribers, do you have any type of newsletter or information going out about the policies that you are trying to affect? Like,
yes,
because I feel like there are a lot more people these days, because of our history of the past 5 or 6 years, that do want to be more involved and do want to push for the positive changes. But a lot of people don't know how to find out the information. Is that something that you guys talk about?
Yes, it is. Yeah, there are monthly updates that are put on the Patreon page. And, part of that is the policy issues we're working on and other stuff that's gone on that month advocacy wise. So it is updated that way. But rounding out the picture in terms of how people can assist as well, we're always looking for board members. If we have yet to find really like a celebrity spokesperson, or maybe somebody knows somebody that can assist us in one way or another, whether it's a donated service that could apply to the nonprofit, or maybe just a way of getting additional exposure to us. It's kind of like why the organization is named after me. I mean, to trying to leverage the name recognition from my case and advocacy work. So to some extent, as go I, as goes the foundation, and to some extent, as goes the the issue, though there are certainly plenty of people in the field in general. But that's really another way that people, can assist. There even people helping to get the word out, whether it's social media or even word of mouth. I mean, and in terms of the Patreon and getting more people involved, that's certainly something that, people that can help. But also, one of the ways we have been able to work towards policy changes is when we enlist people that have the ear of one elected official or another. So when you do policy work on anything, there are people that are with you and there's people that are against you, and you're really never moving any of them. And the fight is always in the middle. Those are the battleground districts. So, I mean, there's been times when myself and other colleagues, we've done speaking events, and there's one person in the audience or another that, we've woken them up to one issue or another, and now they'll make a phone call tomorrow. So that was another, that's certainly something else.
I think that's something that a lot of people are picking up. The power of just getting your message to one or two people might be greater than getting a smaller part of your mission to a whole bunch of people that aren't really, the people that are really tuned in are the ones that need to hear it.
Yeah, because exactly. In terms of my ultimate vision, I would like to have a chapter of the organization in each state and ultimately in each country, because I really see wrongful conviction as a worldwide issue, not an American problem. And countries that we don't hear about exoneration or wrongful conviction, it's not because the wrongful convictions aren't happening. It's because nobody's being exonerated. Very few people are working on it. So hence the desire to expand. But, that's also when we're able to get the public support for that. I mean, I mentioned that we're working on 10 cases, but we have another 7 cases that are approved, but we don't have the capacity to move right now. We're working on policy changes in New York, Pennsylvania, and California, but there's other states, there's advocates in other states that are waiting for us to come into the state and work with them. But, that's when we have the financial capacity, to do that. There's a lot of hidden costs. I mean, if you're going to meet with the elected officials, you have to, there's the travel expense, there's lodging and, meals, and you get literature. There's a lot of stuff. It's not just free to just do it. That's just really on an abstract and basic level. When you get the reality of it, is more to it
than just putting on your Nikes and just doing it.
Right. Exactly. Right.
Well, there is a lot of work that needs to be done. And I'm so happy that you're one of the people in the fight doing it, because you're going to make a big impact and help a lot of people. And I, for one, I don't know you, but I'm proud of you. Like the mom in me the whole time was like, 17 years old, no. And yeah, you're doing great things. And another thing that struck me as this system, I know we talk about it being broken and needs a lot of work, but it's really our system, we the people.
Right.
So I feel like I need to apologize to you. Like, I am so sorry that happened to you in our system. Like, we the people need to wake up and make sure that these things stop happening to people, because it seems to be happening over and over and over again.
Right. Well, it's a very important point, because they do work in the name of, it says the people of the state of New York or state of whatever. So it definitely is true. And, unfortunately, politicians, they rarely do things because it's the right thing to do. It's only really when citizens insist on changes, and it's about, votes and getting elected or getting reelected. So as long as they think that we're all satisfied with the status quo, nothing's going to change. So it is important that we all insist on justice reform, and, very, very important not to get out of jury duty. I mean, that's another thing that people do. And we need to get people there that are really going to hold the government to their burden of proof. My case is not rare. Per the National Register of Exonerations, there have been 2,851 exonerations from 1989 forward across the country. And remember, those are just the people that have made it out. There's still a lot more on the inside than have made it out. There is a documentary short out about me on Amazon Prime called Conviction, which is about my life post-exoneration and advocacy work. So I did want to kind of shout that out. And within conviction, I utilized the platform that I had there to highlight some of the non-innocence justice reform issues, really disturbing things that I either was subjected to or else that I observed others. I mean, things like, terrible medical care in prison and compassionate release and elderly people in prison and, the absence of college education in prison, which is a very serious crime-fighting rehabilitative tool, and a verbal abuse by the guards towards the prisoners. And so I talk about a lot of solitary confinement and people who are over sentenced, and then other people who, when their sentence minimum is up and, they're a different person than they were 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago, but yet they're turned down for parole over and over again. And the parole board is really supposed to assess whether someone's been rehabilitated, but instead they're just deciding based on what the original offense was. Well, that was known on the first day. The judge did that in the sentence. That was why they're in prison. And if that's all that it's ever going to be about, then that's a complete abandonment of any idea of a belief in rehabilitation. So
well, and that's what I've always is our system really about rehabilitation, or is it just punitive? Like we're just torturing these people essentially?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I believe it's just punitive. They claim that it's not, that it's rehabilitative, but I don't believe that. If they wouldn't have the parole system the way that it's had, they would still have college education in prison, which again, if you broaden people's horizon and you equip them for gainful employment, then they have a much better chance at reintegrating back into society rather than having a difficult time getting employment, which then increases the likelihood of them going back to old ways and falling back into old habits. We would have vocational trades that have up-to-date curriculum. We would insist that the instructors actually teach rather than just being there for a paycheck and skating by. And we wouldn't allow verbal abuse from the guards. There would be some kind of real effort on the part of the security to curtail the prisoner-on-prisoner violence that goes on in prison. So for all those reasons, I do not believe that it is a rehabilitative system. I think it's really just punitive. But changing gears for a quick second, one issue I would like to address is I'm often asked if I'm angry. And the first week I was home, I was angry, and it was destroying me. And I realized, at the end, close to the end of that week, this is destroying me here. I want to enjoy my life as much as I can. I can't do that if I'm angry or bitter. I've lost so much already. Why would I want to, in effect, lose the rest of my life? If I was angry or bitter, it's not like I would be impacting the people that were involved in what happened to me. I would really be the only loser in that scenario. And so for those reasons, I'm not angry. And the vehicle that allows me to actualize that is I take that energy that I feel and I channel it into the advocacy work that I do. I do make sense of everything that happened to me in a kaleidoscopic way. My purpose in the world is to, fight wrongful conviction, to free people that are in the same position I was in, to do some work on the preventative side as well. And so with that, I do have meaning, I have purpose, I have inner peace, which kind of brings me to my next point. But did you want to comment on that for
I was just going to say it leads me to one of my closing questions, but if you want to make your point and then.
Sure. Okay. So when I reflect about my life, including the struggles we've talked about post-exoneration, looking at my life as a whole and drawing themes and coming up with conclusions, I've come up with a formula that's actionable for overcoming adversity. So that would be this: have a goal, i.e. overcome the adversity. So you have a goal, have a realistic plan, meaning you should be able to look at it 3 or 4 different ways and say to yourself, yeah, I could see how that might work. Because who wants to carry out, it's the pits to carry out a plan that you don't think has a chance to be successful. Okay. So have a goal, have a realistic plan, be flexible. Remember that the goal is the goal. The plan is not the goal. The plan is just how you get there. So if an unexpected door opens for you that brings you towards that goal, then you need to walk through that door, even though it wasn't part of your original plan. Accept no excuses. So there's no reasons why you can't accomplish something. There might be reasons why something is more difficult, but no reasons why you can't accomplish something. Work really hard. Most likely, your goal is not going to simply come out of nowhere and just drop on your lap. You're going to have to fight really hard, put in a maximum amount of effort. You have to position yourself for some change or some miracle or some assistance to happen. And never give up. So when you reach the point where you can't go on anymore, and that happened to me like 2 or 3 times in the course of my life, I said to myself, maybe this is the key moment right here. Maybe I'm on the verge of a breakthrough, but because I gave up, it's not going to happen. So even though I can't go on anymore, I'm going to do it anyway, just to see what happens on the other side. And when you have that breakthrough and come out on the other side, you have to reach back and help people that are in the same position that you were in. And you have to do some work on the preventative side. And if you can do that, then you can make your suffering count for something. You can get some meaning out of it. You can have some inner peace with it. And you will make the world a little bit better. And I know that that applies to far more than wrongful imprisonment. I've seen people that were incarcerated and now they work with youth, at-risk youth. I've seen people that are homeless that now work with homeless population. There are women who formerly have been domestic violence victims who now help women that are in that position. I attended a fundraiser once as an audience member, and there was a woman who formerly had been sexually trafficked, and now she was telling her story and helping to raise money for the cause of freeing other people that were being trafficked. I mean, you could apply that to someone that's faced some racism or discrimination, sexism, you name it. Something as extreme as that, less than that, and it's generic. So it can apply to many different walks of life.
I agree 100%. From the extreme to minute, the element of the persistence and resiliency. But the most important part that a lot of people forget is the service to others is so huge in our healing and finding purpose and giving our stories meaning. And to that, I was going to, because life seems to be overwhelming for a lot of people these days, and they feel disheartened. And you've just given some great tips on how to be persistent and resilient. But I'm curious, what sorts of things currently give you hope for the future of our country and the world, really?
Well, I think that there are a lot more people working for change now and to make the country and world better. I feel like there are more people doing that now and than before. And I feel like there is more of a social justice consciousness that's kind of in the world. So I do have some hope based on that. I think that, the world is a lot more spiritual than before. And I do think that with respect to broad criminal justice reform, that's kind of like the mood that has swept the country now. So I think that that's another reason for optimism.
Well, good. I feel like that's a good place to wrap it up at.
All right.
We talked a long time. Your story is fascinating, and I appreciate you sharing it with me.
Absolutely. I've enjoyed talking with you, and I'm really happy that you shared your platform with me today. And I know that I'll be, reaching people that are your audience that, I have not reached before. So I feel I feel really good about that as well.
And there's one person, I'll do a proud mom brag, but my daughter's on the other side of that door. She is a social and criminal justice major.
Oh, wow.
Interning in DC this semester.
Wow.
So we're all kind of trying to be tuned in and do the best work we can.
Well, the wrongful conviction issues, the causes of that. I mean, when people do policy work and they talk about wrongful conviction prevention, nearly all the work and focus is really on the state level, like state by state. But almost all of those deficiencies that lead to wrongful conviction in the state cases also lead to wrongful convictions in the federal cases as well. And certainly DC would be, that would be the place. I mean, that's where the senators and, the congressmen are at. So that is the place to be in terms of effectuating change, nationally on the federal cases. So that is kind of an exciting place to be at.
Yeah. Hopefully we can make some changes and the world will be just a little better.
Absolutely.
And we will get the word out about all of your platforms. And are you on social media too?
I am. I have a public figure page on Facebook. I'm on Instagram and on LinkedIn. Similarly, the foundation has an Instagram as well, and it has its own Facebook also. So
okay,
yeah, I'm definitely on social media for sure.
I'll make sure all those links are in the show notes.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that you have been encouraged by this interview, that no matter what hardship you happen to be going through, there's always a way to hold on to hope. There's always a reason to hold on to hope. And please, please, please go check out Jeffrey's organization. I know he has a Patreon. I have been contributing to that since I had this conversation with him. I'm sure he would appreciate some more followers. He is working hard on behalf of people that are someplace that they shouldn't be. And please tune in for the next episode in 2 weeks. Be sure to like, follow, subscribe, and leave a review. We appreciate your support. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our show. If you enjoyed what you heard, feel free to subscribe and leave us a review. If you didn't enjoy what you heard, reach out to us and let us know how we can make it better. This show really is about all of us, not just me and my guests, but how we can all work together to make the world just a little bit better. And if you'd like to connect with us in other ways, be sure to follow us on Instagram. We also have a free Facebook group where our fans of the show can connect and discuss their favorite episodes. And in addition to that, we have a membership platform, The Collective by New World Normal, where you will participate in monthly workshops, pop-up challenges, and weekly meetings to support a more intentional lifestyle. We have meaningful conversations about important topics, all in a space that is safe, supportive, and encouraging. So join us. And if you'd like to show us some more support, check out our intentional apparel shop online, New World Intentions. You'll find t-shirts, hats, totes, all with positive messaging to help you move more mindfully through your day and help you to create that new world normal. You can also check out our affiliate page where you'll find our favorite eco-friendly household and personal care products. Thanks again for listening.